amazing Australians and the story of their lives. You're tuned to Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald.
Hello, listeners, and welcome. I'm delighted to say that my guest today is Martin Blake, Chairman of iHelm Proprietary Limited and the founder of Groundswell Foundation, Australia. The Groundswell Foundation was established to tackle the growing issue of loneliness and its impact on mental health in Australia. Martin is famed in the accounting profession for his esteemed 28-year career with KPMG, including 8 years as chairman of the New South Wales practice in Australia. He is a keen sailor, sailing on the wonderful yacht Wild Thing, and which is a huge supporter of Groundswell Foundation. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you for having me on the show, Rosemary.
It's wonderful to have you. Now, before we get on to the wonderful job that you do with iHelm and Groundswell, I'm sure that our listeners would love to hear a little bit about you, if you don't mind, where you were born, where you grew up, and went to school. I believe you were a boarder somewhere.
Yes. Well, I am an Englishman, and I was brought up in Hong Kong and Singapore. My father was an airline captain. I went to boarding school when I was 7 in England. So I did my schooling and did a couple of degrees in the UK. And I was an investment banker working in the City of London. And then I've always had a passion for sailing. I'm enthusiastic, not terribly talented. And I moved to Australia in 1989, really once I finished a couple of my degrees, to really sail. And the first thing I did when I got to Australia before I had a job, a house, a girlfriend, and a car, was bought a yacht. And so I worked in investment banking for a couple of years.
Right.
And then I joined Anderson's and worked in strategy consulting, mainly in Asia, restructuring banks. And then for the last 27 years, I led the financial services practice for KPMG. I set up the first fintech centre in Australia called Stone and Chalk, and I was the chairman of the firm in New South Wales, head of markets, which is business development, and head of New South Wales government.
Wow.
And I've served on various boards. I was chairman of Sydney University Business School for 10 years, and I served on Committee of Sydney, which is the most influential policy lobbying group in Sydney, for 10 years. I was on the President's Council for the New South Wales Art Gallery. And so I've always had a real focus on giving back in communities. And I guess when I retired from the firm, I really wanted to give back. And it's, in fact, loneliness that I picked to get back on.
Exactly. Now, you told us, of course, that you moved to Australia and were able to do more of your passion, which is sailing. But after you left England, Martin, sadly your father died, and then even sadder still, your sister died. And even though you were in Australia, the burden of looking after your mother was very much on you, even though you were 19,000 miles away. So, and sadly, to compound things, she suffered from bipolar, didn't she?
Yeah, no, that's right. It was my mother, unfortunately, struggled all her life with mental health issues, and she tried to take her life when I was 16. I found her. She was okay when my dad was alive because, she kept taking the meds, but when he passed away in 2010, she stopped taking the meds and things really deteriorated. And it was very difficult because being so far away, basically on the other side of the world, it was difficult for me to manage because I had a young family here. I've got boy-girl twins, and obviously I had quite a full-on job, so I couldn't always sort of pop back and everything. And it was a challenging time.
It's a very difficult time, and particularly for anybody who migrates, as we did, from Ireland, from one end of the world to the other. And like you, I had my parents back in Ireland, and my father died, but then sadly my mother went into a nursing home, but she died at 98. Yeah. But it's that dreadful feeling, isn't it, Martin, when you're there, of knowing that you've got to leave to come back to Australia, and leaving them there on their own, which is a very, very hard thing to do, isn't it? When you've got to get on an aeroplane and you see them standing there waving you off. But to compound things in your case, of course, COVID came, didn't it? And that made you, you were stranded here, of course, as everybody was, and your mother was over there on her own and not well at all.
No, well, what really happened was before COVID, I went over to go and see my mother, as I tried to do at least twice or three times a year, which was quite a big sort of commitment, but I really had to because there was no one else. And this one time I was over, she fell over. She fell over twice in a week. And despite the fact she had a little thing around her neck so she could press emergency, it just wasn't a sustainable situation. And so she went into a retirement home, and that really, to be honest with you, was the beginning of the end, because while she was quite perky and everything, there were a lot of people in the nursing home with dementia, and it was really tricky. And obviously when COVID hit, and it hit in the UK really hard, it was a very difficult time, because I felt really helpless, and you didn't really know what was going on, because you'd ring up a couple of times a week and you didn't really know.
No.
But unfortunately, that the COVID went through the nursing home, and she contracted COVID, and she went to High Wycombe Hospital, and I was obviously ringing her twice a day and everything, but she passed
dreadful
away,
time.
I said goodbye to her.
Martin, you said, and I know it was a very, very sad time for you, and you said you can still see the sadness in the eyes of your twins, Charles and Sienna, when they had to say goodbye to her on Zoom, wasn't it? Or it was just one of the most tragic times, and something that would have hit the family absolutely dreadfully.
Yeah, no, it was a very difficult time. I mean, it was a moment in time, and I'm not unique. This situation happened with a lot of people. I mean, some people lost, more people in their family, and but you do feel very helpless. We drew, we pulled together, and we tried to celebrate her life in terms of, what a wonderful life she had. But I had to organise a funeral from Sydney in London during COVID, which is a very complicated thing to do. And we had a cameraman that we engaged to film it and everything, and that worked very well for the first 5 minutes of the funeral. Then it went dead. So it was all very upsetting, the whole situation.
It's a very, very, very hard time. And what you said, I have heard in an interview that you did, that the sad thing was that your mother was actually very well off and had all the worldly possessions, whereas your wife's mother, who wasn't terribly well off, was in Ireland, but she had family and friends around her when she died. But what really hit home with you was the loneliness that your mother felt being there on her own, and that inspired you, Martin, to start Groundswell. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And I guess it was, what actually happened was when the lockdown lifted, I was able to go over to the UK and start to think about sorting out the family estate and everything. And I actually got engaged because I was on the board of Advance, which is the largest network of Australians in the globe.
Right.
And I got introduced to this wonderful Australian who's based in London, who was Boris Johnson's head of media when he was Lord Mayor, and then when he became Prime Minister, she was head of social media and also spokesman for mental health. So unusually, I had 16 meetings, number 10 Downing Street in 2023.
Oh,
the
right,
UK,
yes.
The UK, the most advanced jurisdiction in the world on tackling loneliness. They've actually had a minister for loneliness for over 10 years.
Right.
And, the Department for Tackling Loneliness, and they've done a lot of research on it. So I met with Dame Tracy Crouch, who's the inaugural Minister for Loneliness, and met with the department, and they were very generous, and they basically gave me all the research. So I came back to Australia, and this is just the time I was leaving KPMG, and KPMG worked with me to produce the most comprehensive report ever produced on loneliness in Australia, drawing on these international insights, and that's called Connections Matter, and that's on my website, which is groundswellfoundation.com.au.
It's an enormous thing, isn't it, loneliness? I mean, there are so many of us that are affected by it. And what really interested me, Martin, is that it's not necessarily just people totally living on their own that are lonely. It can be somebody like you who's in a very high-powered job and the head of a huge company and feel isolated and feel a loneliness up there. So, I mean, it hits all walks of life, doesn't it?
No, absolutely it does. I mean, there are different cohorts of people who are particularly impacted by loneliness, and certainly loneliness tends to be associated with elderly people, but there are groups of people like LGBTI, First Nations people, single mothers, and probably the most disturbing thing that I found out was in fact that it's actually most profoundly impacts young people, and that was somewhat of a surprise to me, because that's very much to do with technology, because young people are connected but disconnected, and it turns out an emoji is not a friendship, and so 50% of young people in Australia are lonely. Now, being lonely is the equivalent to smoking 16 cigarettes a day or having 6 alcoholic drinks a day.
I read that. It's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. But these are the people that hold the future of our nation in their hands. And this is young people aged between 14 and 24 years old. So it's a profoundly important issue that needs to be addressed, and there is no state, federal or local government funding to tackle loneliness. And so I've really made it my crusade to raise awareness, and we essentially do 3 things. The first is evidence-based research. So obviously we produce the Connections Matter report to inform governments, both at the federal and state level, about the facts about this and what we could learn from other countries, in particular the UK. And we've just undertaken the first research in the world through Melbourne University, which we funded, where we've looked at the most effective interventions with young people in urban and rural areas. In fact, we're just about to publish that research in a couple of weeks' time. And that's very important, because a lot of the research on loneliness is sort of really enjoying the problem. It's there are this many people lonely, they're lonely because X, Y, and Z reasons.
Yes.
But there's very little research on, well, what can you actually do about it? Because there's a real stigma associated with loneliness.
Well, you don't want to admit it, do you? That's the problem,
right.
Particularly with young people. They might have 1 million followers or hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram or whatever, but ultimately, do they have any real friends? Now, in 2023, you secured the support of the New South Minister for Mental Health, Rose Jackson, to set up a New South Wales parliamentary inquiry into the impact of loneliness.
Right. Yeah. No, that, I mean, and to be honest with you, that really has been probably one of the most important things I've done in my life, and that process took 3 years to get the support of the New South Wales government, to set up an independent parliamentary inquiry, which is bipartisan. Because really I learnt that from Dame Tracy Crouch. When I was sitting with her in the House of Commons, I said, Tracy, of all the things you could do, what's the one thing I could do to really shift the dial on loneliness? And she said, Martin, the most important thing to do is to, through New South Wales, because it's 46% of GDP in Australia, set up an independent bipartisan parliamentary inquiry which circumvents the political cycle to tackle this epidemic.
Yes.
And if you're able to do that, that will positively impact millions of Australians. And so I wrote the terms of reference, and I worked very closely with Bram Black, who's the CEO of Business Council Australia. He's the former Chief of Staff for the New South Wales Premier. So he was very helpful in navigating our way through the labyrinth and corridors of power of New South Wales government. But at the end of the day, Rose Jackson and the Premier on the 8th of August 2024 announced this independent parliamentary inquiry, the first inquiry of its kind in New South Wales. And Dr. Sarah Kane is the leader and the chair for that inquiry, and they had the first inquiry meeting on it was, I think, the second week in November, and I appeared on there and was able to put our point of view in terms of loneliness.
I must admit, Martin, it is wonderful what you have been able to achieve, and in such a short time. But now, for our listeners, you're listening to Lots to Chat About. I'm Rosemary Peterswald, and my guest today is Martin Blake, chairman of iHelm and the founder of Groundswell Australia, Fighting Loneliness. Now, Martin, just to get on a little slightly lighter side, tell me about sailing and how did Wild Thing become involved? Now, I believe you did rather a wild sail, actually, and it's certainly something you and I share the love of, but you did a rather wild sail from delivering the boat down from Queensland down to Sydney. Did you actually do the Sydney to Hobart, or was that Wild Thing doing it there under the banner of Groundswell?
So, as I sort of mentioned, I moved to Australia really to sail. I learned how to sail when I was 7 years old, and I got taught sail by a guy called Denny Sharp, who taught my father how to fly in Rhodesia when my father was 17, and he taught me how to fly at the Royal Prince Alfred Yacht Club in Pittwater. So the first thing I did when I arrived in 1989, before I had a job, a girlfriend, a house, or a car, was bought a yacht off Denny Sharp.
Right.
And so that's been a big thing for me in my life. For the last 15 years, I've had the privilege of actually sailing on Supermaxes, and I've sailed on Brindabella,
All right.
quite a well-known boat.
Yes.
Maserati, which is an optimised Volvo 70. Comanche, which is in fact the fastest yacht in the world. And then most recently, for the last 3 years, on Wild Thing 100, which was a Cookson 80 yacht. And is owned by an incredible sailor who lives in Queensland. He lives on the Gold Coast, called Grant Warrington.
Oh, yes,
a top 10 sailor in the world. He's done 2 laps around the world with Volvo 70s. I think he's won over 140 offshore races, and he's the owner of Wild Thing 100. When we did the Sydney Hobart 3 years ago, Wild Thing 100 came third, and at the crew dinner to celebrate the race and everything, we came fifth, and crew dinner, he said that it was a great result and really appreciated everyone working so hard, but he thought the boat could go a bit faster. So he said, I'm going to chop the boat in 3, add 20 feet, and see if it does go a bit faster. And that's exactly what he did at Brisbane City Marine. It's an ambitious thing to do, but the boat is entirely carbon fibre. There are only 10 of these boats in the world, but 9 of the boats weigh between 32 and 36 tonnes.
Yes.
This boat, which is now 100 feet, weighs only 19.5 tonnes.
Oh, gosh.
So there's a significant advantage in terms of downwind. The thing was, at the time, he kept the 100-foot mast, the original mast in the boat, and that is what he competed in the Sydney Hobart. Now, so I've done a number of Sydney Hobarts, but I had a detached retina and macula last year, so I don't have depth of vision.
Right.
So I'm not doing any other Sydney Hobarts. And by the way, I've broken my ribs in 2 of them.
Oh,
and
God.
It's not for the faint-hearted. So I prefer doing deliveries where you're sailing, downwind, and I can drive the boat and watch the dolphins and maybe even have a cheeky rum and coke when the sun goes down. So a little bit more relaxed.
It sounds the way to go. I know Bass Strait. I've been there a number of times on our own yacht, and things can change very, very quickly. But now, your father had a wonderful saying, which I think is never buy a house without a view of the water, because it's a garden you never have to weed. Now, of course, our listeners here have just gone through Alfred. I don't know. I can't call it cyclone. It wasn't a cyclone, whatever it was. The water, of course, was a very rough garden to look at. But that's a wonderful saying your father had.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he was really quite an inspired man, and really had some brilliant perspectives on the world and everything. But the thing is that, I mean, I'm really, my heart goes out to everyone impacted by Cyclone Alfred. I mean, to me, it seemed to be, travelling at 7 kilometres an hour, so it almost seemed to be sponsored by Bunnings, Coles and Woolworths, because all the shelves were cleared.
They certainly were, and they still are, I might add. I'm here to prove. I must admit, I went to bed and put earplugs in and hoped for the best, and we were very, very lucky. Now, your father also said to you, and I think to other people as well, in order to combat perhaps loneliness and whatever, you must perhaps try and do a sport that you can do when you're very, very young, but also do when you're in your 80s, sort of snow skiing, sailing, tennis, golf, sailing and swimming. So that's important too, isn't it, for people to achieve?
No, very much so. And one of the really interesting things is, and there are 5 lifetime sports. There's snow skiing, there's sailing, there's golf, there's tennis, and swimming, and there's sports you can do when you're 7 years old or when you're 85 years old, and there's the old adem about 10,000 hours, and I've done 10,000 hours in 4 of those sports, not tennis. I've probably done 30,000 hours in sailing, but I had this incredible experience just last week. I had it was a little random, but I had the opportunity to go to Necker Island with Richard Branson to go to pickleball championship. Now, pickleball is actually the fastest growing sport in the world.
It's enormous, isn't it?
It is. And in America, there's over 40 million people who are playing pickleball. And in Australia, there are probably between 10 and 20,000 people playing pickleball. But the great thing about the sport is that it's a sport for all ages. And it only takes, it's a much smaller court. It's roughly 1/4 of the size of a tennis court.
Yes.
So, and there's less running required, less stress on joints, basically making it much more accessible for a broader age demographic. And the sort of light ball and paddle really facilitate the sort of a game pace that's also accessible for a broader range of people.
Absolutely, and particularly for our sight-impaired people.
The research that we've done with young people, one of the key things to tackle loneliness is to do a sport or hobby.
Yes.
And pickleball being the fastest growing sport in the world, in the US it's really the new Tinder, how people meet each other.
Right.
So I think there's a really strong case, given particularly the New South Wales government have recently legislated to build medium-density residential housing around transport nodes.
Right.
So there's a real opportunity for pickleball courts to be a way of activating unused space in either gardens at home or in medium-density local communities.
Right.
So, and I'm putting this into the recommendations which are going to the New South Wales government.
Oh, okay. Well, Paul, our producer, who, as you know, is blind, Paul plays cricket. How about pickleball, Paul?
Sounds interesting. I'll have to do some research on that, I think.
Yes, absolutely. It sounds as though it could be something that, could well and truly be in the future. But now, one of the things that fascinated me, Martin, was my husband and I spent a number of years sailing in the Netherlands, doing the canals there and whatever. And you said that the Dutch had a wonderful idea, because particularly for older people that are lonely, that they have slower queues at the checkout. Now, I just thought they were slow, but you say it's done on purpose so that people can chat to each other. Should we do that here?
Yeah, well, the thing is that certainly elderly people, some elderly people are quite housebound, and the only time they go out of the house each week is actually do their weekly shopping. And the problem with that is with all this new technology and electronic payments and everything, there's no human involved. And I personally don't really like doing that when I go to the supermarket. I'd much prefer to speak to some young cashier,
Yes.
find out who they are, have a nice chat.
Yes.
And basically what this Dutch supermarket chain did was introduce a slow queue for exactly that. Now, I think that's a real free kick and opportunity for the major supermarket chains, so Coles, Woolworths, IGA, to introduce a slow queue, because obviously there's been a few problems in local communities where there's been a breakdown in trust
Yes.
in those communities with the supermarkets, with accusations of price gouging and everything. It's not my place to comment on that. But what about if the major supermarkets in Australia, which are all in local communities, introduce slow queues?
Right.
That people could opt to go and have a chat and find out what's going on, not just the cashiers, but the people in the queue as well, to build meaningful connections.
Exactly. No, Aldi and all of those. Yes, I'll see whether anybody takes that on. Now, Martin, I'm just going to go through, because we are sadly running out of time. I could chat to you for ages, but the 5 things that you suggest to tackle loneliness, I'm just going to go through, if that's all right, and we might then chat about them very quickly afterwards, is to expand your social connections, cultivate meaningful relationships, utilize technology positively, engage in hobbies and sport, which we've chatted about, and volunteer and selfishly, I should say, help others. Now, libraries, of course, is one of the places that you suggest people could go to. And yes, so do you want to make any comments about those 5 suggestions that you've made there?
Yeah, so I think it's quite interesting. One of the things that I found out about was that the most trusted institution in any community in Australia is the library.
Right.
And state governments have invested in libraries. And certainly in New South Wales, what the government has done is given free Wi-Fi access in public libraries. And so there are honeycombs for vulnerable people.
Right.
From different minority communities, for victims of domestic violence, because it's a safe place that people can go.
Yes.
And so by activating those places and doing, some activities or it might be language courses, it might be dance classes, there's a real opportunity there. The other thing is that I was quite amazed at is the second most trusted institution in a community is the pharmacy. And pharmacies really reinvented themselves during COVID because of the role that they had in terms of dispensing vaccines and all the rest of it. And that was the one place that people could go.
Right.
And they could be independent. So we've got basically, I think there are 6,500 pharmacies in Australia. And one of the ladies on our reference group, she's a pharmacist, and she's developed a program to educate pharmacists about how to positively tackle loneliness in communities.
Martin,
and they get credit for that in the community.
I'm going to have you back again, because sadly we are out of time. And it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. And remember that, listeners, libraries and pharmacies. But thank you, Martin Blake, founder of iHelm and Groundswell, for being my guest today. I'm sure our listeners have enjoyed hearing about your efforts to address this huge problem of loneliness. If they would like to sort of know more about what you do and the wonderful work that Martin Blake does, they can go to ihelm.com.au or groundswellfoundation.com.au or contact us here and we can put you in touch with Martin. So lots to chat about. Has been recorded in the studios of 4RPH Reading Radio Brisbane for syndication around Australia. Thank you, Martin, for being my guest.
It's an absolute pleasure to speak to you, Rosemary, and thank you for taking the time and shining a light on the loneliness epidemic.
And thank you for all the work you do. Thank you.
Great friends and great chats. That was another Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald. Stay tuned next week for another amazing chat.